Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics and not to be outdone by the boss of this circus, Boris Johnson. Michael Gove has decided to waste time trying to argue a Brexit point that his government have signed into law. On this occasion, the role of the European Court of Justice. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news in politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. And before people ask, my hair, yes, was doing my head in. Might look a little bit uneven. Basically, Sarah very kindly did it for me. She watched a video on sheep shearing and just went for it. It's all right, it's fine. Anyway, Brexit. Again, the Brexit drum is being banged good and loud this week. So after Boris Johnson's odd remarks about tigers, which I still haven't quite worked out, Michael Gove has given a Brexit crowd-pleasing speech about not being shackled to EU rules after Brexit. Something about democracy was thrown in as well for good measure, says the man who was a senior member of groups who have broken electoral law on at least 3 occasions. Now, in theory, the concept of not being shackled to EU laws is fine. You know, if the UK as an independent country doesn't want to agree to EU rules, nobody's going to force us. But this is where the emphasis on EU rules is all wrong in the debate. Because the way the gammons look at it is, of course we shouldn't have to follow EU rules. We're not in the EU anymore. We didn't like following them in the first place, apparently, even though they can't name any they don't like. So, and, you know, and you think, okay, that's fine. No one's forcing the UK. The reason the European Union would like us to follow some rules is because we are asking something of them. We are asking for a trade deal, you know. So we're not being forced to follow the rules, but there are 2 good reasons why we should want to sign up to a lot of EU laws. One of them is the obvious one, is that most of them are of great benefit to ordinary people, including ordinary people in Britain. In fact, especially ordinary people in Britain when you have such a sadistic overlord government as we have in the UK right now. But the second reason, as I say, is because we want something from the EU. Preferential trade terms. We don't want to trade with them on World Trade Organization terms. Some people think they do, fine, whatever. Most people do not. And despite what the Brexit players in government will say, this is not unusual and it's not a stab at sovereignty. Japan and Canada, for example, abide by some EU rules in order to trade with the largest market on earth under preferential terms. And Japan are not only wealthier than the UK, they're much more populous and they're very independently minded. But they don't make a song and dance about it. They weren't so insecure that they took it as a slight against their character to sign up to such rules. They went, yeah, okay, this makes sense. There were negotiations, of course, but ultimately they recognised the need to sign up to certain rules to be able to protect the integrity of the single market, which they now have full access to. So the broad thrust of Gove's argument will of course play well to the Brexit crowd, but is utterly nonsensical. True enough, if the UK doesn't want to abide by some EU rules and nobody is asking us to sign up to all of them, just in 4 areas, then that's up to the UK. But by the same token, if the EU don't want to agree a trade deal with us, then that's also up to the EU because, you know, that's how it works. And I find it continually baffling that the gammons think it's outrageous that the EU should expect us to sign up to any EU rules, but equally outrageous, if not more so, that the EU might refuse to give us the trade deal that we are demanding. And because what they're actually outraged about is that the EU won't allow themselves to be forced to do what a non-EU country tells them to. They say, well, we're an independent country, we shouldn't be forced to do things. They're independent countries. They shouldn't be forced to do things either. Simple. But that's all part of the political debate. You know, it's one of those subjective things. And you could have 2 intelligent people on both sides of the argument debating those points until the cows come home. Where Michael Gove would fall absolutely flat with his little speech was this statement, which I'll quote. "One thing we cannot do is accept the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice." That's interesting. That's an interesting statement. I'll read it again. "One thing we cannot do is to accept the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice." Now, he says that like he hasn't already done it, and yet he has. And not only has he already done it, by virtue of the fact that he voted for a motion in Parliament that said we're going to do this, but the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, his boss, has signed such a commitment to accept the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice into law. Because in Article 4 of the agreement, for example, signed by Boris Johnson and voted through by Conservative MPs, including Michael Gove, it says, and again I will quote, "In the interpretation and application of this agreement, the United Kingdom's judicial and administrative authorities shall have due regard to relevant case law of the Court of Justice of the European Union handed down after the end of the transition period." That basically means that UK courts, a case can go through UK courts if it's on a matter related to the withdrawal agreement, covered by the withdrawal agreement basically, then actually the final arbiter is the European Court of Justice. We've already signed up to it. It's there. So there it is. I mean, it is there. It's in black and white. It's not a case of agreeing to accept the ECJ has jurisdiction in certain areas at some point in the future. He's already done it. And it's there and may be viewed on the government's website. And there are other nods to the ECJ as well in the agreement. For example, the ability to use the court to bring new cases to the UK for up to 4 years after the end of the transition period, again pertaining to compliance with this new withdrawal agreement. So, you know, if there's a case being brought against the UK government on a matter that at the moment would fall under the jurisdiction, that will still continue. So it's not like a load of cases are going to suddenly be dropped at the end. But obviously, once we do leave the transition period, there will be certain areas that the European Court of Justice won't have jurisdiction over, but it will still continue to have jurisdiction over any cases that were started before the end of it. That's quite clearly in there as well. And again, Boris Johnson signed up to it. But, you know, consider the following as what would definitely be placed. So let's say it's January 2021. Or even, quite frankly, January 2023. But it's January 2021. We didn't extend the transition period, let's say. It's ended. We are now a fully third country that has no deal with the EU. But we do have an agreement with the EU, the withdrawal agreement, that was agreed with the EU at the end of 2019 and voted through by Boris Johnson's MPs in early 2020. But let's say we are not, and that doesn't end with the transition period, by the way. That is in perpetuity until, of course, such time as we replace it with a different treaty or decide to cancel the treaty. I'm not sure legally how easily that is to do. But anyway, let us say we're at that point, so we're still bound by the withdrawal agreement because that's not got an end date, and we're not complying with one or more aspects of this agreement, which, by the way, we won't be. So the EU Commission can then take the UK government to court. And the court they will use is the European Court of Justice. And we have signed up to say that we agree that they have jurisdiction in that matter. Now, it has to be said that the ECJ, again, I'll say, only has jurisdiction over matters of this agreement. But consider this. We agreed to it. Boris Johnson and his merry band of Brexiteers agreed to it. They voted for it. Now that means that despite what they try and tell their public, they fully understand that this is the price of an agreement with the EU. Because the withdrawal agreement is a relatively simple agreement. It covers very important things, but in terms of, you know, how it, well, if it's fully implemented, it shouldn't affect our lives too much. What will affect our lives is the fact that we will have left agreements, not entered into this agreement. As a result of that, this relatively modest agreement, the government agreed to accept the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. I mean, that is beyond dispute. It's there on the government website. So they understand that if they want an agreement with the EU, then anything in that agreement is going to be covered by the European Court of Justice. They are going to have jurisdiction over it. So if we want a comprehensive agreement, a deal, in fact, a full trade deal with the EU, then we will be accepting the European Court of Justice's jurisdiction over a whole range of matters, much more than is the case now. And you may say, well, that's really unfair. But the fact of the matter is, there isn't a trade deal in the world between any two countries or trading blocs that doesn't say that there needs to be a court that has jurisdiction over disputes. Because there can always be disputes. One side may feel that the other side is not following through on their commitments to it. There has to be an international court that you accept as the final arbiter. Now, in theory, we could negotiate with the EU to have it be a different international court. In fact, there's nothing to stop us setting up our own international court, which would be jointly funded by the EU and the United Kingdom. In fact, that was considered in commentary last year. That would be perfectly possible. But that's not what the UK government are suggesting either. There has to be a court. And at the moment, what we have signed up to is that court is the European Court of Justice. And if we do get an agreement with the EU at some point, which at some point we will have to, I don't think it will be anytime soon, because I think the people of this country need to demand one. At the moment, not enough of this country are demanding that we get an agreement. So I think the people who at the moment think we can manage without one need to see what that looks like. So at some point we will. And when that point comes, we will have to have written into it a court that has jurisdiction over us. And it would be simpler if it was the European Court of Justice. But anyway, there it is. Before I waffle on too much, hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, then please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.